the average person will live roughly 4,000 weeks. So I have about 2,024 weeks left. I guess maybe 2022, since I started studying this a couple weeks ago. But the reality is that all of us are grappling with time. Some of you may feel like time is running out. Some of you may feel like there's just not enough time, or some of you may want to hit fast forward and speed through some things and make time speed up. But the reality is that dealing with time is a thing that has plagued human nature for centuries. Physicist Stephen Hawking says this about time. He says, "Time flows like a river, and it seems as if each of us is carried relentlessly along by time's current. There's no stopping it or slowing it down, as German philosopher Martin Heidegger has said, that our relationship with time is so woven into who we are, it's almost as if we are time. Maybe you look at your calendar and it looks like a jigsaw puzzle or some kind of mosaic with the multicolored events all scattered around. We have alerts, we have reminders, we have things that bring our attention to time. It seems like we can be ruled by this reality. But again, this was something that even Kohelet, the author of the majority of Ecclesiastes, this preacher, this wise sage, even someone like him centuries ago was grappling with, was living in time. And we shouldn't be surprised that he would tackle the issue of time, because as we've looked in Ecclesiastes, he started by wrestling with some pretty existential questions, the big questions of life. For example, in chapter 1, he talks about why life feels so vain, why it feels so futile, why it feels like hevel. And then in the majority of chapter 2, he's running these experiments on himself, seeing what will make me happy. And he looks at pleasure, and he looks at work, and he looks at the pursuit of wisdom and mastering life, and none of those things he finds would make him happy. He comes to the realization that God alone is the only thing that can fill the hole in his soul. And so we shouldn't be surprised then that he wrestles with time, because we are all wrestling with the clock. It is ticking down, or I guess in his day he's wrestling with the sundial, but we all need to live wisely in time. And so what does he say for us and how to navigate being thrust into this river and carried along by the rapids of time? How do we live wisely in that situation? First of all, what he says here is that you need to embrace the season that you're in. Embrace the season that you're in. Look at verse 1 of chapter 3. He says, "For everything there is a season and a time for every matter under heaven." Kohelet sees our lives unfolding with these chronologically arranged slots, these seasons, just as the world turns and just as the seasons move from winter to spring to summer to fall, and each has its distinct flavor, each has its distinct characteristics. So human lives go through phases, go through seasons, and each has its distinct characteristics, its distinct flavors, its distinct challenges, and its distinct responsibilities. And he speaks to these seasons in one of the most beautiful poems in all of Scripture. It may be something that you've heard at a funeral before, but he reflects on the paradox and nature of time. He says, a time to be born, a time to die, a time to plant, and a time to pluck up what is planted, a time to kill, and a time to heal, a time to break down, and a time to build up, a time to weep, and a time to laugh, a time to mourn, and a time to dance, a time to cast away stones, and a time to gather stones together, a time to embrace, and a time to refrain from embracing, a time to seek, a time to lose, a time to keep, and a time to cast away, a time to tear, and a time to sow, a time to keep silence, and a time to speak, a time to love, and a time to hate, a time for war, and a time for peace. He reflects on the nature of time with these 14 pairs, these reflections on the various seasons of human life. And if we were to categorize them, I think he's getting at here is that there are seasons of upheaval and movement and change in the human life. For example, he says a time to pluck up, a time to break down, a time to cast away. These are times in your life when you may have to move out of state, take that risk, take that job, go for that thing that God has been putting on your heart for years, and step out in faith. A time where you may take a look at your life and you say, actually, we need to uproot some things here. The foundation of my life needs some work because there's things that I've been doing, things and patterns that I've been developing that just aren't helpful to me or honoring to the Lord. And so I need to dig these up, pluck these up, pull these up, and rebuild and restore. There's a time for upheaval. There may be a time where there's a certain crowd or a certain group that you're running with that is just not good for you and it's leading you down a not great path, and you need to step away from those people in your life. There's a time of upheaval, of movement and change. But then he also says there's seasons of stability. He says there's a season to plant, a season to heal, and a season to build up. These seasons of stability are times when we must commit to something. In order to receive a harvest after you plant, you have to wait. You have to be patient. You have to let the seeds be watered and grow. And so there may be times in your life where rather than moving on, you have to plant your feet more firmly where you are. You have to endure through the difficulty, persevere through the suffering. You have to go and work things out with a friend or a spouse in a relationship. There's times that you have to dig deep and stay rooted. There's all these different seasons of life that we face. And so I think one of the key questions then that this poem is raising for us that we have to grapple with is this: what season am I in? That's the question that you need to ask yourself. What season am I in? Because misdiagnosing the season you're in can make life very, very difficult for you. If you're in this season where there needs to be some upheaval work, some uprooting work, some risk-taking in your life, and yet you're thinking, well, this is a season of stability, you may just miss out on what God has for you. Or you may be in a season where you need to remain planted, remain set, remain firm, and you're wanting to move beyond that. And you may feel very restless, and you may end up making decisions or end up making choices that really make your life much more difficult because you were meant to remain where you are. And so the thing that you really need to be able to perceive is what season are you in, because, as I said before, trying to live in a different season than the one you're in will make life very difficult for you. You know, this was written by me and not AI because there's spelling issues and missing words and grammar. That's how you know. I'm notorious for that. I definitely have the worst grammar on the staff. But trying to live in a different season than the one you're in will make life very difficult for you. It'll make your choices much, much harder for yourself. But I think there's also a deeper, profound truth that Kohelet gets at here, which he doesn't state explicitly, but as we reflect on this poem and we see this rhythmic cadence, although he didn't have a clock in his day, you can almost hear the seconds ticking away, a time for this and a time for that, a time for this and a time for that. But as you reflect on this poem, what you find is there is no choice involved in when the seasons come. The pairs just unfold, a time for this and a time for that. Next line, a time for this and a time for that. We do not pick our seasons. They pick us. We do not pick the seasons that we're in. They pick us. They are thrust upon us. And that's a hard pill for us to swallow because we like choice and we like efficacy and we like agency and we like mastering life and controlling life. And we think I can design my life, I can make my life to be what I want it to be. But that's just not true all the time. There are many times when things come upon you. You didn't ask for them. You didn't want them. You want to get out of them. But whether you like it or not, they are here. And that's what makes time feel like a tyrant. Is because we often don't get a choice for the season that we're in. It just comes to us. But we can make things worse for ourselves when we are in these seasons and we experience the tyranny of time when we, number one, we want to rush ahead into a new season. When we're not embracing the season that we're in, but we want to rush ahead. I mean, the classic example of this is children, right? Like all children want to do is grow up. And then you grow up and you become an adult and you're like, this is kind of terrible. It reminds me of the song 16 by country artist Thomas Rhett. It's being sung by this 15-year-old. He's learning to drive and he's like, his dad is saying, be careful, watch out. And he's like, I'm not green like those 10-year-olds. I just want to be 16. And then as the song progresses, he's 16, and then he wants to be 18 so he can go out with his friends. And then he's 18, and then he wants to be 21 so he can go party with his friends. And then the song ends when he's an adult and he's married, and then he's actually looking at his life and realizes that he can be content where he is. And so there's many times in our life, though, when we want to rush ahead, when we want to just get out of the season that we're in. And this is difficult, especially when you're suffering. Because nobody likes to suffer. And that's a good thing. But many times the Lord puts us in seasons of suffering for a reason. As I've talked about many times before, right? The last 4 years or so have been pretty difficult in my family's life and my personal life. And I sometimes wonder, because there were so many times I've felt distracted by challenges and obstacles and stress and anxieties of things, and I didn't always feel like I was giving my best to my family or my best to the church. And you look back at those times and you're like, I just have regrets on this. I wish I could have applied myself to this or done this. And someone said to me, but you wouldn't be the person that you are now without that. And that's the same for you as well. You are not the same person that you would be without that suffering, without having to persevere through that time, without those challenges. And God often works most deeply in the waiting. And so we just need a little bit more patience. I think about the seasons of life when we think about our relationships, especially our romantic relationships. Many times, Christians, they start dating. They might want to get married, but one of the questions that kind of lurks in some of the discourse floating behind these relationships is, how far is too far? Which essentially is how much physical affection is okay for believers. And that's not really a question, though, that Scripture addresses per se. I think a better question to ask is from the Song of Solomon, where the author warns and says, don't awaken love until it pleases. In other words, the question that Scripture has for us in our dating and romantic relationships is, when is the right time? When is the right time? Because some people, you're just too young or too immature and you're not ready yet. It's not the right time. We don't want to awaken love before it pleases, because love is like a fire that can consume and burn everything. When it's harnessed the right way, whether in a fire pit or a fireplace, it can be beneficial and useful. But stepping into a season that you're not ready for, opening something you're not ready for, will only cause damage. When is the right time to pursue someone for marriage? And yet we want what we want. And so we can be tempted to want to jump into a relationship or jump into a new opportunity or just get me out of this season, Lord, is what we pray. We don't want to remain planted and embrace the season that we're in. If you are a new parent, you probably want to get out of the season that you're in. But the reality is that God has given you new life. Like, you just created new life. That's a miracle. And so God has you there for a reason. And sure, the first 6 months, you feel like death because of the sleep deprivation. And you're probably not going to be killing it in your career. You're probably not going to have much of a social life. The goal in the first 6 months to a year is just keep the thing alive. That's it. That's the season you're in. All hands on deck, survival mode. And if you're thinking, well, I want to thrive, I want to crush it, I want to, do like all these things, that's not reality. That's not going to be true for you. You have a young child that doesn't sleep. You need to embrace it. Don't rush ahead. Don't try to you'll only end up frustrating yourself. You'll only end up burning yourself out. And this principle applies to so many other areas in your life. You're not going to have 10 years of career experience in 8 months. It's a grind and day after day faithfulness and showing up to work, accumulating experience, accumulating skills, making connections, building relationships, networking. And if you try to rush ahead and you try to be on the top of the career mountain, you're going to end up burning yourself out. And so embrace the season that you're in and do not rush ahead into a new season, or you will experience the tyranny of time. Some of you are in school, and school can be terrible. It can be boring, but that's your job. That's your season of life that you're in. Don't rush it, but persevere through it. But we can also experience the tyranny of time number 2 when we do the opposite, when we want to go back to an old season. But the reality is there is no going back. We are in the river, and the river of time only flows one way. It's kind of like Uncle Rico in Napoleon Dynamite. I used to be able to throw a football over the mountains, right? It's the washed-up high school athlete that's in his 30s. And all they can talk about is the glory days. Bruce Springsteen, right? Or it reminds me of an episode of the TV show 30 Rock where one of the characters is an actress and she just turns 40 and she's having an existential crisis because she feels like, okay, as an older female actress, she's going to be phased out of all these projects. And so then she starts dressing like a teenager and she gets on stage, and then someone sees her on stage, comes up to her afterwards and says, "There's nothing older than trying to look young. And baby, you looked like a million years up there." But isn't that one of the pathologies of our time, trying to be someone that we're not? And I think one of the dysfunctions that we have is that those of us that are advancing along, we try to turn back the clock. We try to be young. We are not. But what the church needs, what the next generation needs, what our society needs, what our country needs, what your family needs is maturity. We don't need to give in to the pathologies of some of the things of when you get older, like lack of curiosity, being stuck in your ways and stubborn and things like that. But we need to embrace who we are and where we are and what season we're in. And there is so much that you can offer. Our society does seem to be obsessed with youth many times, but what youth needs is wisdom. And you can have that. Not judgment, right? Not saying like, oh, well, everyone, no one does it like we do it. No, not that. But they need maturity. They need wisdom. They need guidance. They need proverbial, spiritual parents. So don't try to step back. If you're married, you are not single anymore. Your primary responsibility is to your spouse. So don't try to act like you're single. If you're a parent, don't try to go back and turn back the clock to when you were before a parent. That is the season that God has you in. So embrace the season that you're in. Ecclesiastes explicitly warns us of wanting to go back. It says in Ecclesiastes 7:10, "Say not, why were the former days better than these? For it is not from wisdom that you ask this." Nostalgia is a sin. If you are pining for the good old days, if you're pining to go back to a former season in your life, what Ecclesiastes is saying is, you're a fool. You're a fool. And maybe for sake of argument, right? Maybe for sake of argument, the good old days were better than they are now. But what you're missing in that line of thinking is the fact that God can work in the present and the future. And in fact, as believers, what is best for us is coming in the future. It's not the past. Our past is actually the worst that can happen to us. The best is yet to come as we wait for the return of Christ. So we need to have a future-looking orientation in our life. There is no going back. Be planted where you are. Set your gaze to the kingdom that's coming. So Ecclesiastes tells us to embrace the season that we're in. But it goes on to say that we must worship the God of time. Verses 9 through 15 are really now a meditation on who God is in relation to time. And while we cannot escape the relentless flow of the river of time, what Kohelet points out is that God's works are timeless. He says in verses 14 and 15, "I perceive that whatever God does endures forever. Nothing can be added to it, nor anything taken from it. God has done it so that people fear before him. That which is already has been. That which is to be already has been, and God seeks what has been driven away." What Kohelet is pointing out here is that you cannot thwart the plan and purposes of God. Whatever God sets his intention to, he accomplishes it. Whatever he does endures forever. You can't add to it. You can't take away from it. If God says it, it's done. He is sovereign. He has written the story. He is the one in control. And Scripture all over the place affirms the absolute sovereignty of God, his control over all things. For example, in Isaiah 46:10, God says of himself, "I am God. There is none like me," declaring the end from the beginning. When you get tempted to be afraid of what's happening in the world, you see wars, rumors of wars, AI, all this stuff. God's written the end. He's there already. Nothing is outside of his control. Everything is unfolding according to his plan exactly as he wants it to be. Jesus himself said there's not a bird that falls out of the sky without the Father knowing. He also says that the Father knows every single hair on your head. But the point is that we don't despair over a fixed fate. The point of God's sovereignty is worship. That would be moved to worship. That's what it says in verse 14. God's sovereignty over all things is meant to inspire worship in us. He does all these things so people fear before him. So what does it mean to fear God? We should have this awe-inspiring reverence for the Lord. Fearing God is not being horrified of God, but it's this visceral response of respect. God gives his commandments to his people in Deuteronomy 6:2 so that they might fear him. Proverbs 1:7 says, "The fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge." And so when we rightly worship the Lord, everything else in our life is put in proper perspective. We can fear the Lord because he is Lord over time. He created it. There was a time when there was no time. It was just God, the Father, the Son, and the Spirit eternally existing. in a love relationship. How that works, I have no idea, because all we know is time. But then God speaks, and he spoke time into existence. He is the Lord of time. He is outside of time. And if we don't fear that, then what would we fear? But the reality is that fear of God creates fearlessness within us, because there are things that God has called you to do in your life that you need to step out with some courage and boldness and take a risk for. One pastor has said that God's servants are indestructible until they have finished the work that God has called them to do. That is what God's sovereignty inspires within us, that you are indestructible until you have completed the work that God has called you to do. So what would you do if you believe that? What would you step out to accomplish if you believe that? Where would you step forward in faith? What courageous work do you need to do? Because you know that the Lord is Lord over the clock. We see the fearlessness in 3 Hebrew boys in Daniel chapter 4. The people of Israel had been carried off into slavery by the Babylonian Empire, and that was the world's superpower at the time. And Nebuchadnezzar, the king of Babylon, had made this giant golden statue, massive golden statue, and commanded everyone, when you hear the music, you need to bow down and worship me. Worship at the statue. But 3 Hebrew boys said no. And they wouldn't bow, and they wouldn't worship the statue. And so King Nebuchadnezzar hears of this, and he brings them to himself, and he questions them, and he says, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego answered and said to the king, "O Nebuchadnezzar, we have no need to answer you in this matter." Talk about courage, right? You are face to face with the most powerful person in the world, and these boys say, we don't got to talk to you about this. Because what they knew is he had no real authority over them. They were under the care of the one true living God. And they go on to explain, if this be so, our God, whom we serve, is able to deliver us from the burning fiery furnace, and he will deliver us out of your hand, O king. Oh, I forgot to mention, when people wouldn't bow down and worship him, the king had this blazing furnace that he would chuck people into and burn them alive. And he's threatening that to Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. But they know the God they serve. They say, he's going to deliver us. He is sovereign. He is in control. He is the authority. But then they say something even more shocking. Something I think that's really important for us to say to ourselves as well. In verse 18, in Daniel 4:18, they say, but if not, be it known to you, O king, that we will not serve your gods or worship the golden image that you have set up. Those 3 words change everything for you. But if not. But if not. Because Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, they don't know the plan. They don't know what the future holds. They know who God is, and they say, yes, God can deliver us, but they are unable to see into the future, just like all of us are not able to figure that out. But what they rely on is God's character. But if not. See, it doesn't matter the outcome, is what they're saying. It doesn't matter that things work out for our happiness and the way that we want to, because God is worthy of all of our worship, no matter what. One thing I heard from another pastor, and I totally agree with this, is that if you have young kids, you don't tell them the plan. You don't tell them the plan. If you have young children, don't tell them the plan. You're going to go see Grandma, Grandpa on Saturday. If you tell them the plan on Sunday, guess what they're going to say when they wake up Monday morning, as soon as they get up? Are we leaving today? Are we going to see Grandma, Grandpa? And then when you see them later on in the afternoon, what are they going to say? we going to see Grandma, Grandpa today? Are we leaving today? And then at dinner time, are we going to see Grandma, Grandpa today? Because their small child minds can't grasp the plan. So don't tell them the plan. Just go visit when you're going to visit and they'll be fine. But that's how it relates with us to the Lord. Our small, finite minds, we cannot grasp the plan. And the point isn't really to know the plan. It's to trust Him. It's to trust Him. It's to trust Him in the but if not. Because I think sometimes if we knew the plan, if you knew the outcome of your life, you would probably be horrified by it. Or you might try to get around the suffering that God is going to put you through. But if not, that is how we are to relate to God. God, I'm trusting you. I know you're powerful. I know you'll deliver. But if I'm not able to have children, God, I still trust you. But if I'm not going to get better, God, I still trust you. But if I'm not going to make enough money to provide, God, I still trust you. But if I'm not going to meet someone, God, I still trust you. But if I'm not able to figure everything out, God, I still trust you. But if not, that is how we relate to the Lord. And the reason why we can have complete security in who God is and His sovereignty is because of Jesus' but if not. Because in Matthew 26:39, His obedience to the Father, He says, "My Father, if it be possible, let this cup pass from me. Nevertheless, not as I will, but as you will." In the Old Testament, the cup is often a symbol for God's wrath and judgment. And so this cup now is being passed to Jesus, and Jesus must drink the cup down to the dregs as He takes on the sins of the world. And this cup is a cross. And what Jesus is saying is, in a very human way, because He's fully human, says, "Lord, I don't want to die. Let this cup pass from me. But if not, your will be done." See, Jesus' obedience to the point of death on a cross brings us securely into God's plan and God's hand. His but if not. Because He's saying, God, I trust you. And I'm obeying you. And He did that for us. He went to that cross for us. He expressed that obedience to the Father's will for us so that we might be forgiven and might be brought into God's plan. And so even though you may feel like time is a tyrant to you, that it's running out or it's never enough, or that you just are going to not accomplish or achieve or do what you want in life, even though time may feel like a tyrant, it's because of Jesus' but if not to go to the cross that makes you have a relationship with God, who is now your Father. And not only is God your Father, but He is the sovereign King who rules over time. And He has your life in His hands, and He's guiding your life, and He's working in your life, and He will be with you through it all. And so you can say to Him, but if I don't know the future, God, I still trust you.